It's time to put your health in your own hands. Get ready to learn from today's top health and wellness innovators and thought leaders on Optimal Health Radio. Now, here's your host.
Hi, everyone. This is Tammy Patzer, and I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, Dr. Bill Bergman. Dr. Bergman is a graduate of Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons with a 49-year-old history in integrative medicine and stress management. He has devoted his professional medical career to patient care, writing, and community health education. After working as an emergency department physician in 3 hospitals in one of the most innovative preventative and integrative family practice clinics in New York City, where he specialized in clinical nutrition, therapeutic lifestyle, and stress management. He has focused his latest work in the field of destructive habit and addiction recovery. He has an online consulting practice, a course in ending destructive habits, and has provided training for nonprofit organizations, including St. Matthew's House in Naples, Florida. Dr. Bill's teaching style has always emphasized distilling complex topics into a practical and comprehensive format so that his audience can receive real results in terms of improving their health and well-being. Welcome, Dr. Bill.
Thank you, Tammy. It's wonderful to be here with you and your audience. I'm very grateful to you for giving me the opportunity to share what I've learned and what I've experienced, and hopefully it'll be of great help to people in your audience.
Well, I think that your topic about ending destructive habits is really important today because, face it, we all have habits, and some of them are good, but many of them are bad. So tell me a little bit more about your background so that we can kind of set up our conversation, which actually will be about how do we end destructive habits and addictions.
Right. Well, I went to the medical school at Columbia University with the intention of becoming an eye surgeon. They have a great eye institute there. But in my 3rd year of medical school, where we left the classrooms of the medical school and actually went into the hospital wards of Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center, began to actually work with patients, we had a medical preceptor. That's a kind of older professor of medicine, a mentor who would take our little group of 7 or 8 third-year medical students and actually go through the process of examining the patients and analyzing their laboratory work. And Dr. Grokest, my medical preceptor at that point, he was a specialist in rheumatoid arthritis. He was doing a lot of, at that time it was the late 60s, a lot of research in autoimmune illness. And one afternoon he sat us down and he said to us, "Never forget that this illness is psychosomatic." And I was absolutely stunned because what came to my mind, what is he saying? That it's sort of imaginary or somehow, psychosomatic? But he just went on to explain that psycho means mind and somatic means body, and that there was a mind-body connection. And a light went off in my consciousness where I actually had a total change in my career path from eye surgery to what turned out to be holistic and integrative medicine. And over the years, I've really focused on the root causes of chronic disease because, of course, we need conventional medical treatment without a doubt. Thank God they're there for us in emergencies, serious infections. But when it comes to chronic disease, things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes and Parkinson's and all these chronic problems, persistent low-grade problems, I just wondered, why is it that the human body just created out of out of God's incredible creative intelligence, how how is it that the human body gets sick? And so over the years of practicing, we used to call it holistic. Now we refer to it as integrative medicine. I began to really kind of focus on the issue of the root causes. And one of the most important, in addition to dietary issues and environmental toxins, is the issue of stress. And so I began to focus really on stress. And over the last years, particularly since moving from Colorado to Florida, I've been working with nonprofit organizations and really focusing on the issue of how we can end destructive habits and addictions.
So you really have done a lot of work related to stress and addictions, and you specialize in holistic and the integrative approach. So when you say there's a hidden solution for a no willpower approach to ending unwanted habits, what do you mean by that?
Well, I say that it's a kind of a hidden key. See, the prevailing opinion out there, the consensus within our culture and within the medical and mental health professions, the prevailing belief is that unless we get to the deep personal psychological issues that originally formed a habit or addiction, that unless we really delve deeply into the person's past, we really won't have much success in being able to permanently end a destructive habit or addiction. And it turns out that the science and the experience as we move forward tells us that that's not true. That it turns out that for whatever reasons we might have formed a habit that we then find is tremendously destructive, or it could even be mildly uncomfortable. I mean, there are different kinds of habits, but that it's not really necessary to get to the root causes, whatever they were, of why the person originally formed the habit. It's a matter of understanding how the brain has taken the repetitive behavior or the repetitive mindset and has created neurocircuitry that causes an urge or a craving to be generated from a portion of the brain that drives the continued repetition of that particular habit, whether it's a behavioral habit or a mental habit. And as we can gain insight as to how the brain is creating that circuitry, we now have, through the modern brain science, the key to being able to actually end it. Now, we still have our issues. We still have our psychological challenges of life and all of that. But we're free then of the encumbrance and the burden of the habit itself. So we're free to be able to get on with our life, go through our personal and professional activities, and deal with our issues, but we're not encumbered by that destructive habit or addiction.
So when we have these habits of, is it necessary to get into your deep personal issues in order to get rid of these bad habits? What's really behind all of it?
Well, it's the way that the brain, we can kind of, in a way, simplify the issue of brain science, at least for the purposes of understanding how to end a destructive habit, by clarifying that there's essentially two parts to the brain. There's the lower brain, which is actually kind of in the lower part of the just above the brainstem, they call it, and then the higher brain, which is higher up in the skull. The lower brain, which is from an evolutionary point of view, is kind of like, reptilian is one way that they describe it. It's a brain that operates totally on the basis of survival, and totally on the basis of instinct, and totally on the basis of repetition. And this lower brain is vital for our life functions. We wouldn't be able to have a heartbeat. We wouldn't be able to breathe. We wouldn't be able to digest our food. All of our basic physiological function, procreation, and all of this is through the function of the lower brain. Now, above that, the higher brain is where we have our more, we can say, the qualities of what it is to be a human being rather than being an animal, a reptile. The higher brain is the human qualities of love and compassion and altruism. This is where we have a conscience. This is where we make choices. This is where we have judgments. And so we have the lower brain concerned only with survival, and we have the higher brain, which is what really we can say it can give us the ability to discern between right and wrong and what we want to do, what's healthy or unhealthy. And so what happens is through repetition of behaviors that are not really in our best interest or even destructive, the lower brain, which doesn't really have a thinking capacity, it just works based on repetition. It forms these conditioned neurocircuits, which then, as a consequence of having been repeated many, many times, is interpreted by the lower brain as necessary for survival, and therefore generates urges to continue that habit, even though from a higher brain point of view, it's actually not in our best interest, might even be tremendously destructive. So this is getting into understanding how the brain functions to maintain a destructive habit, but it also gives us the key to be able to end it.
So it's all about the urge. So what do you do if you've got this like internal urge other than just try to use your willpower or resist it?
Well, this is a key point, Tammy. You see, when we get the urge, we feel as if we've got to act on our habit, whatever it is. I mean, we have habits which have to do with substance abuse and alcohol. We have habits which have to do with obsessive compulsive activities. We have habits related to gambling and shopping and binge eating, all of these kind of habits. We have habits of a mindset where we're just anxious, where we're maybe kind of pessimistic, where we're constantly procrastinating, we're just in a state of discontent. These are all various kinds of habits, but they're all essentially driven by the urge. And so the whole idea is to be able to separate the feeling that we're having and not identify with it as being relevant, as being true, as being, in other words, we use willpower because we think that those feelings are actually to be taken seriously, because the feeling or the urge, it expresses itself through our consciousness. And so we have a feeling we should do the habit, but then we also have from the higher brain, no, you don't want to do it. And so we feel like we're kind of fighting ourselves, and the only way to deal with it is to kind of give into it, to end that tension associated with the buildup of that urge, or we have to fight it with our willpower, white knuckle through it, when actually we just have to recognize that it's a kind of neurological toxicity from the lower brain based on repetition and reinforcement that's leading to the urge. And the more we gain the insight of what that urge is, that it's coming from the lower brain, it's not really a true urge that we need to act on. We don't have to give into it. The more we create separation between ourselves, our true self, and that kind of addictive feeling, it even can express itself as a kind of addictive voice. The more we create the separation, the less we have to act on the urge. And the good news, here it is, Tammy, the good news is that if we let the urge go without acting on it, over time, those urges will fade and weaken. Those neural circuits become kind of like, because they're not being used as frequently, they begin to fade. This is a concept that we call neurotoxicity. So I hope that gives you some clarity as to why it's not willpower fighting, one part of us fighting another part of us. It's that we are really kind of dealing with something which is coming from the lower brain, but it's certainly not us, and therefore we can really kind of dismiss it. And dismissing the urge leads to the weakening of the neurocircuitry that's driving the habit.
So it's kind of like seeing the urge in a new way. So you ignore the urge and then it kind of weakens because it's not getting its needs met in a real simple way of putting that together. So can you tell me more about the latest brain science to clarify how all of this works?
Well, we have the impulses, the signals from the lower brain based on the repetition that makes the lower brain, even though it really doesn't think, but it kind of interprets the repetition and the reinforcement as necessary for survival. So it generates these urges. If we don't understand that those urges are kind of a neurological toxicity, then we act on them. We feel like we should. We feel we're in battle with ourselves. But the more we have insight, the concept of neuroplasticity is that the brain is not a static organ. You see, when I went to medical school, they taught us that basically all different parts of the body can heal and regenerate, the gastrointestinal lining and the liver and on it goes. But when they came to the brain, they told us, no, the brain is, once you lose those brain cells, once you lose those neuro connections, those nerve connections, that's it. But actually, that's not true. The science, the latest brain science, it's referred to as neuroplasticity, and it's talking about how brain cells, something called neurogenesis, brain connections, brain circuitry, these things are much more fluid than we knew. And so the latest science is actually telling us, it's demonstrating through the research that if we can just dismiss the urge by recognizing what it is, and that it's really not to be taken seriously, that it's neurological garbage, that the urge will pass. And then by not acting on it, those circuits from the lower brain weaken. And as a consequence, we don't have the urge. Without the urges, we won't have the habit. Now, we still have all of our life issues. Yes. But we're no longer encumbered, as I said before, by this destructive habit. So the neuroplasticity is the latest brain science to really give us the hope that the brain can heal. The brain can actually rewire as a result of gaining insight and understanding that allows us to let the urge kind of come and go rather than a compulsion to kind of act on it because we feel it's relevant or that it really is coming from, it's a part of us. It's not. It's just neurological toxicity from the lower brain.
Wow, that's really interesting. So what is the most effective way to rewire your brain?
Well, it's by gaining understanding and insight. It's really, the word dismiss is better than the word ignore, because by trying to ignore it, in a way, you're putting attention on it. We don't want to put attention on it. That the extreme form of putting attention on it is trying to fight it, is trying to use willpower to fight it. And all of that reinforces it. Even when we try to ignore something, in a way, we're kind of like focused on it. By dismissing the urge, we mean that we're actually, through our understanding and insight, we just don't see it as relevant. We see it differently. We feel it differently. One of the analogies that I like to use is from The Wizard of Oz. You remember that Dorothy and her friends were just so frightened of the Wizard of Oz, and he was that all-powerful wizard, and he was just, his voice was booming, and then the little dog Toto pulled the curtain on the wizard, and he turned out to be this kind of kind of professor type, working all these dials and all these levers and generating this image, this illusion of this powerful wizard. So it's kind of like the Wizard of Urge. We have this urge that we feel is so, in many ways we feel it's overwhelming, or even in a milder way that we just have to sort of act on it, and we get the urges and they become reinforced. The best way is being able to learn through insight how to dismiss the urge, seeing it in a different way. And I can give you an analogy, kind of like a backseat driver who, as we're driving, and and you're getting to the intersection, you see the yellow light, you decide you want to stop. But in the back seat is this person back there screaming for you to go through the light. And the screaming from the backseat driver might be very intense, but in a way it has no control at all over the steering wheel or the accelerator or the brake in the car. So that backseat driver is like the impulses from the lower brain. And the more we recognize it's a backseat driver, I don't have to pay attention to it. It will fade. As the urges fade, then those circuits weaken. And as they weaken, and over time, for some people it takes a certain period of time, for others it can take longer. It's all many variables depending on the level of understanding and insight. But the more that we can be able to see, we don't have to pay attention to that backseat driver. Those urges will fade, and with the end of the urge is the end of the habit.
Wow, that's really important breakthroughs that you're talking about. So if somebody wants to get in contact you to find out more about how to work with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I have a free special report on the topic that we've been talking about this morning, Tammy, and they can just go to any of your listeners, www.enddestructivehabits.com, enddestructivehabits.com. And they'll get a report, and it goes over this information in a little bit more detail and kind of introduces people to the work that I'm doing, helping them one-on-one or through workshops and other things which I have available.
Okay, super. So what is your website again?
It's www.enddestructivehabits.com.
enddestructivehabits.com. And could you repeat exactly how people can get that report?
Well, that's the website they go to. If they go to that website, they'll be able to give me their email so that I can send them the free report.
Okay, great. enddestructivehabits.com. I think that this is really important. And another time, I think I'll invite you back and we'll have another conversation and dive a little bit deeper into this topic and maybe get a little bit more specific. I'd really enjoy that if you'd like to come back another time.
Oh, I definitely would. I would appreciate that very much. And again, it's Enddestructive Habits. It's plural on the habits.com.
Okay. Enddestructive Habits with an S.com. So before I let you go, is there any final thing you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, I'm just grateful to you for creating the platform for this kind of information to be shared with people. And I just know that it can be of great benefit to people, no matter what kind of habit or what kind of situation they're facing, the implications in terms of stress relief in general and relationships. And there's a lot to offer here. And I'm grateful to you for the opportunity to be able to share it with your audience.
Well, thank you so much. And again, everyone, we've been talking about how you can end those destructive habits and the brain science behind them with Dr. Bill Bergman. Thank you so much, everyone. This is Tammy Patzer. Go make it a beautiful day.
You've been listening to today's top health and wellness innovators and thought leaders on Optimal Health Radio. To get more solid health and wellness information, visit optimalhealthradio.com.